In this session, I'll try to convince you that ADRs are the best thing since sliced bread. I'm kidding, but just a bit. So anyways, did you know that we humans make around 35,000 decisions every day? If you didn't, now you know. So most of those decisions are obviously unconscious decisions, but we'll try to see how we make the important, significant decisions. Right. Hello, my name is Vladas Diržys, and it's truly a privilege to be here today in front of you. Before we go further, let me quickly introduce myself. I come from Lithuania, live about 15 years in Norway, Trondheim. Probably before I came, it snowed there. So professionally, I'm interested in domain-driven design, software architecture, and I will work as a solutions architect at Sportradar. And on a lighter note, I believe I'm reasonably good at Mario Kart, if anyone wants to challenge me. Right. While we are going to talk about our decisions, let's first clarify what do we actually mean by architecture. And one could assume architecture is some fancy drawing of a diagram, right? Actually, we would put it very simply. Architecture is a set of decisions. And Gregor Hoppe, in his book, The Software Architect Elevator, illustrates this with a drawing of a house. Even though it has many elements of a house, such as door, windows, roof, I think we can agree we would not expect such a drawing from an architect. However, consider a similar sketch on the right. This house, or these houses look almost the same, and it's still very simple, except for the roof. And this house has a steep roof because it's designed for a place with cold winters and lots of snow. And a steep roof helps the snow to slide off easily. And the roof overhangs, stop snow piling up in front of the windows and protects the windows. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is that architecture is about making intentional and thoughtful decisions that shape the structure and function of something. And also consider, as an example, how we build houses around the world, right? So we build them differently depending on the area where they are built. So context matters for our decisions. And similar in our software architecture, our decisions must align with our specific context, our specific circumstances. And also, it also means that there is no good or bad architecture. It's either fit for purpose or it's not fit for purpose. So we can clearly see that context really matters for our decisions. However, it's also important how we make these decisions. Are we always as rational and methodical as we think we are? And there's this famous book by Daniel Kahneman. It has been mentioned today already in some of the talks. And in this book, the author explains the two systems in our brain, System 1 and System 2. And System 1 is fast, automatic, and based on intuitive thinking, but it's also prone to biases. And System 2, however, is slow, methodical, and for analytical thinking. But it is also lazy, and it is uncomfortable to be in System 2 for more extended periods of time. Now, we can't use System 2 for all the 35,000 decisions during the day. That would be madness. But we should try to engage it when making decisions with possibly big consequences, such as significant architecture decisions. And now a question to you, the audience. How many of you have less than 10 browser tabs open in, wow, that's a lot of people. Also counting mobile phones? All right, still quite a few people. I'm surprised. Unfortunately, it's not the case for me, but when I see this, I can see David Beckham opening the door and saying, be honest. I trust you. If you say so, I trust you. Like I said, it's not the case for me. But the point I'm trying to make is that most of us have busy schedules, live busy lives. We go from one meeting to another. Email notification pops up or instant messaging notification. It's challenging for us to keep up with everything in our brains because our brains have limited working memory capacity, and we are constantly distracted, right? So our brain needs some assistance. And scientific studies suggest that writing decisions down leads to better decisions, because it first clarifies the thought process, reduces cognitive biases, enhances memory and reflection. Also, interestingly, it's writing down strengthens the commitment, because when we write the decisions down, we are more likely to remember them and more likely follow through with the decisions. So let's go step by step how we would make a decision and write an ADR, architecture decision record. So to set the scene, imagine we are front-end developers, hopefully, or this should be doable in app development conference, web development conference. And we start a new front-end project. For that, we need to decide which front-end framework to choose. So let's do this. So first of all, we start with a title, simple enough. Title should be brief, descriptive, and prefixed with decisions ID. And we start with our ADR 001 because it's our first decision today. A significant decision, I should say. And we choose a generic title right now, choosing front-end framework. Second thing is the status. And the status is self-explanatory here, but I'd just like to say a couple of words on the superseded status. And we have a status because ADRs are immutable. Now, that's not to say that if there's a typo in ADR, you cannot fix a typo, you can do that. But let's say if a decision changes, we should create a new decision and change the status of the old decision to superseded by the new one. So our status is going to be draft. Now, the next section is the context section. And as mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, context matters. Here, we want to describe the problem we are facing, the constraints we are under, and the relevant background information, basically. So let's let's write our context. And here I was rather brief in describing the context, that we are just starting a new project and we need to choose a front-end framework. And I listed some requirements, such as high performance for mobile users and some key considerations. But depending on your context, you would write possibly much longer context, or shorter. And then the next thing that we are going to do is define our options. And obviously, the first option is self-evident for most of you, I believe. So React. And here I describe some pros and cons for this option. But I would like just to say that depending on the option, if the option is not necessarily clear to the audience, we should probably also describe it. But I believe here React is self-explanatory, what it actually means to everyone here. And then we are going to define our second option, which is Vue, again with some pros and cons for this option. Now, let's say these are all the options that we have right now. So what we can do now is do a preliminary decision. And when we are writing a decision, we should use active language and be brief in our explanation. So right now, let's say we use the Vue framework because of reasons, and this despite being less mature than React. So we are also acknowledging that there possibly are downsides to this decision. And then, after the decision, we also define the consequences. And the consequences are both positive and negative. And I sometimes see teams describing only positive consequences, but overlooking the negative consequences. However, rarely an important or significant architectural decision doesn't have negative consequences. So when we define negative consequences, we show that we were diligent enough and considered those. And positive consequences tell us why are we accepting the negative consequences. Right, and after we have done that, we can say that decision is proposed now, and we can go into whatever our decision-making process is. So different teams, companies can have different decision-making processes, or possibly don't have these processes at all, at least defined. That's also possibly the case for a lot of us. But what we are going to do, we are going to follow an architecture advice process. So in architecture advice process, anyone can make a significant architectural decision as long as we seek advice and try to understand that advice. Now, so we are going to talk to people affected by the decision or people with expertise. So first of all, we talk to Liam, the React expert, and he tells us that React's performance can be addressed with some techniques, something that we learned. Right, secondly, Sarah, our front-end engineer, tells us that onboarding is probably not a big deal now with GitHub Copilot. So also slightly changes our context. Then we went and talked to software architect David, and he tells us that our framework should support design system, an existing design system that we have in our company, let's say. Something that was not necessarily on our radar, but we learned this because we went and talked to people around us. And then we also went to talk to Julia, design system product owner, and she tells us that the design system supports React and Svelte. Now, the framework that we just chose, or preliminary chose, was not even is not even supported by the design system. Now, what we can do now is go and reevaluate the decision, but we are going to do something else. We're going to go and incorporate all the advice that we gathered now into the ADR itself. So first of all, we're going to update our context. We're going to say that team's existing skills and familiarity is not that critical because GitHub Copilot is going to write all the code. Then design system support also added as a key consideration. Right, and also going to update the option saying that React is supported by design system, Vue is not supported, and also going to add a third option, Svelte, something that came up on our radar now. And after we have done all that, we are going to go and reevaluate the decision. And now we changed our decision because new facts emerged and we got more information. Right, then we chose React here. After that, we are also updating the consequences again, positive and negative, and changing the decision status to accepted because we made the decision. And as the last thing, we are updating the name, renaming it to represent the actual decision because we want to be able to look at the decision or a list of decisions and want to know what these decisions actually were. Right, and we could stop here. I think we still have some time. So we not only saw the structure of an ADR, but also went step by step how we would make an architectural decision, or technically you could use that approach for any decision in life. So the structure of an ADR that we just seen is slightly different from the original template introduced back in 2011 by Michael Nygaard. And so we saw two additional elements there. First of all, we saw that there are options and then the advice. While I would say the options element is just made a little bit more explicit because when we make decisions, we probably choose between something. There's something that we have to choose from even if that second option is not doing anything, we are still choosing something, right? Well, advice, we didn't really talk about it, and that's what we're going to do now. So first of all, I want to be clear that advice is not an opinion. In an opinion, someone can tell you, I like something over something else, I like B over A. However, in an advice, we are looking for reasoning. If you like something, we want to know why do you prefer this over that. Secondly, as illustrated in our example, when we gather advice, we naturally make better informed decisions because we can fill our blind spots that we are not even aware of with information. Thirdly, when we gather advice, it allows us to build trust in our decision. And this is especially true if we can show, as I showed in this example before, incorporate our advice or try to understand the advice that we gathered and show it to the people that we try to understand it. And also it can work negatively if we are not showing it, if we are gathering advice and we are just ignoring it, so people in the end probably will not want to give you advice. Right, and last but not least, it allows, as I mentioned before, decentralize our decision-making. So in an architecture advice process, anyone can make a significant architectural decision as long as they seek advice and show that they try to understand it. That's not to say that we necessarily need to agree with all the advice. That's not the case. That's what I'm suggesting. But trying to understand and show that you're listening, that's important. And this architecture advice process is described in very detail in the newly released book by Andrew Hermelot, Facilitating Software Architecture. If you would want to implement architecture advice process in your organization, I definitely recommend reading it because it provides a lot of practical advice how to implement that process. Right, so, and the template that we just looked at is described in Andrew's book. I would say it's just a little bit more opinionated in his book. The approach I showed here is less opinionated. Now, there are various different templates, and I would like just to point out another template that I think can be quite handy sometimes. And this template is from Jacques Reed's book, Communication Patterns. So in this template has one additional section, evaluation criteria, and the advice changes name to consultation, but virtually, I believe they are the same, consultation and advice. So in the evaluation criteria, we would outline what's important in making this decision. So what, for example, architectural characteristics and constraints that are priorities. And now there can be many architectural characteristics or criteria. However, we need to choose the most important ones. Not everything can be a priority, and sort of we have to make already here a decision before we make a decision, so which is a little bit meta. Now, once we have that criteria defined, we would go into each of our options and evaluate each of our options against the evaluation criteria, and we would give a score to each of the criteria. And once we have done that, at the bottom we can have a total score for that particular option, and also we can list some trade-offs, for example, for this option. So once we have evaluated all the options, we can go and choose option that has the biggest total score. Now, one note here is that this method is not as scientific, so that if there is just 1 point difference between two options, that you necessarily need to choose this option that has a higher score. However, it should give a good indicator which options are much better over other options. Right. Now, we looked at a couple of templates, but an important thing here is that we have to be pragmatic when choosing a template. If, let's say, this last template is not practical for you, you should not choose a template. So consider choosing a template that makes more sense for you, for your workflow, for basically that fits your team's needs. So make sure it's not a burdensome task. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what kind of benefits you get out of ADRs. So as discussed at the beginning, ADRs improve our decision-making. So when we write ADRs, we bring clarity and structure to our thought process and also structure to our decision-making process. Secondly, because we over time gather with ADRs, they also act as a historical record how our system evolved and what there were reasons for our architecture or our choices. And also this helps enormously with onboarding new people, because then they can see exactly these reasons why the system is as it is. Thirdly, when we write ADRs, this also improves the communication within team and with our stakeholders. So also this, we come to a shared understanding across these roles. And also related to that, it also helps with the transparency of our decisions. Think of the times when a decision was made and you were not involved in a decision, or maybe your colleague was not involved in the decision because, let's say, we were away, we could not join a meeting or so. With ADRs, that situation changes because when you can share an ADR of the reasoning of your decision, and people can still possibly comment on that decision after those meetings. Now, we are almost done with the presentation, and I see your worried faces. We haven't mentioned GenAI yet, or not directly at least. So that's what we're going to do now, so don't worry. Right. So let's examine what GenAI holds for ADRs. So first of all, a very natural thing. It definitely helps with the creation of ADRs, writing of ADRs. I use it myself as well. Just makes it much easier, faster. It sort of democratizes who can write ADRs. It's not necessarily the ones who are really good at English in writing ADRs. Right. The second thing is analysis and of ADRs. If you think of projects that, and I've seen projects having many decisions. So with GenAI, you even today can upload all your ADRs, let's say, to a tool like NotebookLM, and you can analyze your ADRs and sort of speak to your ADRs, if you will. So that I believe helps a lot and will help in the future. Thirdly, I've talked to people who are implementing automatic architectural change detection and checking if an ADR exists in our system. And this can allow you to even break the pipeline, if you will. I'm not arguing now whether it's a good or bad thing, but I see this becoming reality in the future. And last thing here, what I would mention is that ADRs can allow us to generate automatic competency matrix. So especially if we, or possibly only if we collect the advice section and we can show who gave us advice on what the decision, on what area, sorry. Right. So, as a last thing, I would like you to leave with some actionable advice how you can get started with ADRs. So first of all, think of your projects that you're working on. What sort of decisions are there that are not documented, that don't have an ADR yet? Maybe there's just one big decision that doesn't have an ADR yet. Backfill at least that one decision, or maybe more. But I've seen this being valuable, and people joining after can then reevaluate these decisions and maybe create a new ADR for that decision, if they want to change the decision. Right. Also, start noticing when a decision is or just was made, and either create an ADR yourself or ask your peers for an ADR. So that the noticing part is important as well. We don't always think that, oh, there is a decision. We are not really conscious sometimes that we are making a decision here. Then also consider if you are in a leading role or an architect, or let's say you have meetings where you discuss architecture or decisions, consider discussing ADRs in those meetings. And a last thing, it's definitely much more complex, but also, if you want, consider introducing architecture advice process. When it works, I've seen it working, and it feels like magic. Now, I would say that introducing ADRs does require a cultural shift, and cultural shift requires time and effort, and the best way to change a culture is to lead by example. And if it would be up to me, so it would be you, because you're listening to the talk, who are changing the culture in your organization or starting with it. So patience is key in this process, but the good news is that you don't need anyone's permission to get started, actually. So just do it. Just write your first ADR. Right, and I think that's it.